Hello, world. Welcome to the Rod and Rain Show. This is Al Rod,
And here's Lady Rain.
and today we are going to be ranking the stories in the first Tales from the Hood movie.
As I have now lovingly named it Tales from the Good. Because it's the only one that really matters in the trilogy. But
Yeah, this is the one I think we have the least issues with. Well, not even think. I mean, I know we have the least issues with this
yeah.
one.
Yeah, the ranking in this one is not a worst to best. It is just they're all good, but somebody's gotta be in the bottom.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of give away how I'm framing my rankings because this is kind of different because I could not in good conscience just say one story
Any
is
of them are bad.
deserving to be
In the bottom
yeah,
slot.
it just because I was watching it last night and I was honestly trying to watch it more critically for the sake of ranking
Ranking, yeah.
and
Me too.
I just could not pick out anything that stood out as so problematic that it just had to be
It's a
docked.
guess. I was like, I couldn't even nitpick.
I really couldn't, man. It's like there are certain things, I guess, with the effects that look a little maybe dated because it was the 90s. But I mean, I'm
But
not going to
because it was
hold
the
that against it.
'90s, you can't really ding it
Yeah.
for the time it
And,
was made in.
and I think it effectively serves the story. And most of the time, it's practical effects that actually look really damn good given the
For
time that
the
it came
time
out.
and the budget,
Yeah, so yeah, even
especially
on
knowing like the behind the scenes stuff that went into producing it on that budget. Because we watched some of the the behind the scenes stuff, like what they were able to do with what they had
yeah,
is commendable.
yeah. So even on that front, it was hard for me to just ding anything for anything significant. There was nothing I was looking at that shouted out at me that it was just of such bad quality. I felt like all the stories had merit, whereas with the sequels, I'm just like, why is this here? Why are we even engaging with this topic for a story? I felt like all the stories were vital. So for me, my ranking, it, it's really not a ranking. I think what I did, especially with my bottom three, I restructured the stories in a way where I thought it would have had more impact. Like I reordered them according to what I felt would have been more appropriate for how I saw the stories building off of each other. So
Huh. So
that's
this is
kind of
not
what
going
I
to be as
did.
exciting as I thought. Because I wanted to know like how you ranked them to see if we. Because I'm always interested to see if we think the same about like how we came to that decision, like the criteria and our justifications. Because I did rank them. I
Mm-hmm.
do have a 5 through 1, but my five isn't. Oh, this is the worst tale in Tales from the Hood. It's
Yeah.
just based on personal preference. So my criteria here was just based on the horror elements, the social commentary, and um, the ties to the hood.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I ranked them. But I did rank them, and I really just looked at based on how I felt about it in those areas, which stories did it the best, down to which stories where it just wasn't either as evident or as strong
Mm-hmm.
to me in that tale. So I did rank them that way. So now I'm kind of like mad because I'm like, your list isn't ranking.
It
So
took the sting
it
out
just
of
took the sting out of like, oh man, did we feel the same way about like what does he have at number 5? Is it the same as mine? But you went into it with a totally
Well,
different mindset,
to be
so
to be
it's not gonna say
fair,
much.
to be fair, this list I made, it was the list I made when I was of the mindset of I'm just ranking them, and
Okay.
it just happened that this is kind of how I would have restructured it
Okay.
anyway.
Okay. All
So I
right.
can still talk about it in that fashion.
Okay. Cool.
So
Because
it's like
I
it.
like that's one element of these conversations when we're ranking where I am just genuinely intrigued because I feel like I just learn a lot about how we both think.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have similarities or have like just very small differences, I'm like, hey, it reassures me that like I'm watching movies right. Because you are a cinephile.
I don't think there's any
And
wrong
not a
way.
wrong way, but you are the grander cinephile in our duo.
That's
And
fair.
so
That's
the
fair.
lens that you watch a movie through, sometimes I feel like I'm not on par with like how you interpret film
Mm-hmm.
because you watch movies with just such a keen eye to an entire piece. Like you catch surface level, theme, tone, you catch everything, even in like the first viewing. And for me, I always feel like I'm just not up to par. Like I don't feel like I'm a good movie watcher compared to you.
Oh no.
And so whenever I'm like ranking and I'm like on par, I'm like, oh, okay, I did do that right. I did interpret that. Like you are like my compass of like movie interpretation. So if I share information that you agree with about how I watched the movie, I'm like, yes, I got it, you know? So that's why I'm like always excited for these conversations because then I'm like, okay, I did watch this deep enough because I know how deep you watch films.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, man, what? Like I feel like a superficial viewer compared to you. But in these conversations, I'm starting to learn like, hey, you have taught me a lot about how to watch a movie because before I met you, I know for a fact half the shit that has come out of my mouth would have never. I wasn't watching the movies like that. I was a very surface level viewer, and I'm gonna take whatever the obvious takeaways are from a movie, and that's just what it was. And then I'd never think about it again. I'd never do deep reflecting, no introspection, no none of that. And in the 13 years that I've been watching movies with you, I would like to think that throughout that time, I have become a deeper movie viewer. From like, we couldn't have had these conversations 13 years ago watching these movies. Not from my end, at least.
Yeah.
Your conversation would have been like what they are now, and I would have been sitting here like, yeah, I thought the movie was good. Woo, man, that was some bad acting, wasn't it? Yeah, man, the love, like that's it, you know. Like I didn't have
you had
layers.
You had the general audience.
I got like okay, just your subtitle.
Yeah.
Your like this is what they wanted you to get out of it. Okay, and that's it. And I'm able to now watch something, and I am like, I find like we were watching this last night, and I was like, I feel like I'm in like a film study course. Mm-hmm. Because I'm actually like being mindful of like what I'm watching and what I'm choosing to write down and what points I want to bring up. I wasn't thinking about movies like this at all before I met you. Yeah. I wasn't watching some of these movies before I met you. It wouldn't have crossed my mind to think this deeply about film.
I hear you.
So I'm glad to know that like your ranking is still kind of a ranking because I just want to know.
Yeah,
like
it is
where we fall on it together.
If I were forced to rank them, this list is in line with where I would probably rank them if I'm evaluating for, quality, I guess, in that way. This is pretty much what it would look like. So it's not too far off.
All right, cool. So, all right, I feel better now.
Yeah.
So I think it's me starting us off today.
Mm-hmm.
So just as a reminder, my criteria for this, how I rank them, just the strength of horror elements, the strength of ties to being an actual tale relevant to hood life and issues and experiences, and then just the social commentary, the message that was, the moral or kind of the goal of that story, how well those came through in the story.
Yeah.
So with that said, my number 5 is KKK Comeuppance.
Can I give away that my number 5 is KKK Comeuppance as well?
So I had an original ranking. I had a different ranking when we started. It was not number 5. Mm-hmm. But then the movie that I had at number 5, I had it there for, I was being petty.
Yeah. So
I reworked my ranking as we got through more of the tales last night. So it ended up in number 5. More so because it was, I can't even like verbalize why I put it at 5. I just felt like all of the other stories did a better job of doing some of the other things.
I will say, for me, I think why I put it the lowest is because I think when I weigh it against the other tales, I mean, you're really just waiting for Medgar to get
right,
to get what he deserves,
and you're not empathizing.
Yeah,
With
there's not a single character you empathize with in that
exactly,
story.
exactly. Like I couldn't quite figure out how to verbalize it, but that was the story where like I was not invested in like the well being of the main character. I didn't care to see the main character, I guess, succeed or prevail. I guess it's like, no, you don't need to be governor.
Yeah,
And they're gonna get their reparations today.
Yeah,
and it's gonna be at your expense. And so I mean, and it was done very well. It's just that's why it had to be at number 5, because my connection to the main character, like I wanted that demise. I guess I wasn't rooting for him, so to speak. And it was probably the most removed from being a hood tale. That's the other reason I put it down there. Like the issue itself is relevant to the hood, the politics and the racist overtone, not even overtones, just the racism, like all of the things that this governor would have stood for would have impacted those in the hood
in a horrible way.
But the tale itself did not put you in the hood element. There weren't characters representative of the hood in there. It was just the most far removed from being, this is a tale of horror from the hood. And all of the other ones were tales of horror in the hood.
Yeah. And with that said, though, I do think it's still a critical tale to be told, just because my whole thing with Tales from the Hood and why I love it so much is that, and this is why I would have actually had this tale come first, is because it frames the historical and social context for all of the remaining tales that we're going to be looking at.
I think I know your ranking.
Yeah, it really,
in my mind. I think because we have talked this movie to death, y'all. This is a horror movie that we can revisit pretty much anytime, and we have talked it through so much that I know exactly how Rod sees the tales and the building blocks within them. So I'm not gonna like spoil what I know he's already gonna talk about, but just knowing how I know you think about, I think I know, because this is our first time talking about it while ranking. Any other time we've talked about it, it's just about the movie in general, the tales in general, but we've never really placed them in a certain order in any way. But knowing how you feel about the tales and what they do for each other, I think I know how you're building this list up. So I just want to see if I'm right. But yeah, so this was, number 5 solely for that reason. But then I also agree that it felt like it could have been, it's that foundation of everything else that's to come.
I think so, yeah. And I think the main reason I have it at number 5, honestly, is just by comparison, it's rather low stakes compared to the other tales, because there's literally no character in this tale that you empathize with at all. There's, I mean, you have the dolls and the history associated with them, and they're kind of seeking justice in their own way. But even with the dolls, I mean, even though they have roots in slavery or whatever, like on the screen they're just objects. So it's like it just, this story, if I'm nitpicking, it just kind of left me less to invest in.
Yes,
I guess.
But while we're on it, I do want to, I still want to make sure I'm giving props, because this whole movie was just so well done. So, I mean, I did like, there are elements in there that I appreciated. Like, I really liked that as Medgar was about to be taken over by the dolls, like, he's trying to protect himself with the flag. I just thought that was just so symbolic of, like, how that demographic feels, that America's supposed to protect them. America's, like, say, like, America is your your anchor, so to speak. And so he was like grasping onto this flag and pulling it up to himself as if that was going to keep him from being eaten alive by these damn dolls. But it's like, I thought that was just a really clever element to have in that story, that, you know, it's this little subtle piece. And then I also liked that Rusty's parents were in this story. I thought it was really cool.
His mom was the one in the chair.
Yeah, I think his mom was the one in the chair, and his dad was the funeral guy.
Think so.
Yeah. So I thought that was just a nice little piece to include them in that tale.
Kind of immortalize them in that way.
Exactly, like putting them in that tale, standing up against this racist politician.
Yeah.
They get their payback. You know, like I thought that was a cool way to use them in there as well.
I think originally, going back to Mecha covering himself in the flag, I think in the original ending, if I'm not mistaken, he was actually supposed to hang himself.
I do remember you saying that, which either one of those would have been, I think, a fine ending, or symbolic to include in there. I think either one of those could have worked for what the concept and content was of this story.
It's like the inability to shield yourself from your history. It's like the negative impact of slavery is baked into everything in our contemporary society.
Right.
And everybody's going to feel it reverberate all over. And you can't hide yourself from it. And just being content to just say, we're America, we're a melting pot, we don't see color. And just saying you don't see it is not going to rid us of any of those complications.
The issues are still there, the problems are still there, the struggles are still there, and there is a very clear group of people causing it. But yeah, so that's my number 5. Not because it was a bad tale. It was very well done. It's just, like you said, low stakes, most removed from the hood. And it was just a character there was no empathy there for me. So you want me to go ahead and do 4 since you threw out your 5?
Yeah, go ahead.
My number 4 is, as I read this list, I'm like, I really hate that I have to have some movies in the bottom and some at the top.
I know. It's they're all solid to me.
My number 4 is, and I'm looking at it now, I'm like, do I want to swap these? My number 4 is Boys Do Get Bruised.
Okay, that's your number 4. All right.
It was a switch I made from my list yesterday again. My 3, 4, and 5 were ones where I was very teeter-tottering on, because I feel like this could be number 3 too. I would have put it at 4 or 3. But it's another story that very well done. It had horror. Like, I was terrified for what was the kid's name in here? Walter. Yeah. The horror I felt secondhand for Walter was absolutely there. You know, for content for anybody who, for whatever reason, hasn't seen this movie yet, which is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, generally, we do these talks under the assumption that people that listen to us have seen the movies. So, I mean, we don't really give spoiler alerts at all. So
we are not a spoiler-free zone.
I guess we should do the courtesy of, like, I guess, giving that warning, but I think it should be understood.
Yeah, like, if you're clicking to listen to something about Tales from the Hood, it's
or about anything.
Or anything.
Like, we're spoiling
it's because you've seen it and you want to hear our insights on it.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's a child abuse story. A step-parent is nicknamed Monster, and Walter has been trying to get adults to listen to him, and every time, you know, previous, you know, like schools or someone outside of the home is trying to investigate, they just up and move this boy and his mom and this, I guess, stepfather, because I don't even know if it's clear that they're married or not. And we finally get a teacher who is like, I'm just going to take this into my own hands, and I'm going to his house. and figuring out why this kid's coming to school. He's got bruises that are older than what align with like a fight he had in school that day, or he's coming in with these new little bumps and things, and so he goes to investigate, and the stepdad comes home and he's like, oh, I'll talk to him, and the teacher just decides that's not good enough, and is battling with himself whether he's just going to leave it alone or not. But then as soon as he leaves the house and he notices there's some stuff going on in the house, like the stepdad is just like beating the crap out of the mom and Walter. And the horror was really in, like you see this monster that Walter's been calling this man, and you feel for him, and man, it was so well played. Like, David Alan Grier is the monster.
Yeah.
And if you only know David Alan Grier for comedy, and you see him in this, you're like, he was terrifying.
Absolutely.
Like, he took that role and just turned it on, and he was a monster. And then they brought in a supernatural element of, the way that they defeat this monster is by Walter had drawn a picture of how he imagines him looking. So not like, not monster like in his regular David Alan Grier form, but like it's this big green actual monster looking being. He drew him at school and brought the picture home. But the teacher brought the picture home and destroys the picture. And as he's destroying the picture, the stepdad there in the house is getting the same damage that Walter's doing to the paper until he's all twisted up on the ground. And then so Walter defeats the monster that way. And all of that is just great. I can't even tell you why it's at 4. It's just because I know why my other movies are higher. Again, it's like I felt for the character. It is absolutely tied to the hood. He's in a school environment where you can see the ties from the hood. You usually being in a school where like teachers don't really like believe you is a very hood thing. Like, like at first he tells it to the nurse and he tells it to the teacher, and they ask like, hey, Walter, you didn't get that bruise from the fight you had today. It's been there for a while. What happened? And Walter goes, the monster did it. And like initially the nurse and the teacher, whatever his name was, it's Rusty. Rusty plays the teacher. At first they're just like, okay, well, when you want to tell us what really happened to you, let us know and we'll help you. That's a hood issue in itself of just kids not being believed when they're trying to like get some help for themselves. It's like he calls it monster. He's got it tattooed on his arm. Like he identifies as monster in that home. But, at first they don't hear him until he keeps showing up and he's just getting worse and worse. And then finally he's found an adult who's like, oh, let me do something about this. Let me go to his house. So, I mean, it brings in that hood element. The message is there. You can see the horror across a few different regions there. And I mean, I have no gripes with this story. It's just something had to be number 4.
I got you. If you were forced to identify anything that maybe it lacked compared to others that are higher on your list, would you be able to isolate anything?
I don't know that it really lacked anything. I'd say that this story, I felt bad finding a little bit of comedy in this story. And it's not because they probably meant for it to be comedic. It's just because of some of the effects or the way it's filmed and some of the mannerisms that Monster displayed.
I think it's completely unintentional.
Yeah, it's unintentional. So I mean, there's that, but I don't really think it was lacking anything. Yeah, no. I think the only comedy that I think was intentional was "Boy Must Have Had Weak Bones" is just a hilarious line to me. Like, because
I don't know. I mean,
I just
it sounded like sincere
it
when he
sounded
said
sincere,
it.
but it's how he
So,
said it. Look, where it's like,
must have had
boy
weak
must have
bones.
had weak bones, and I'm like, what? That's your takeaway because he broke his arms and legs falling down the
Yeah,
stairs,
fell all the way down the
and you're
stairs.
calling that weak bones? Like, no, he fell all the way down some damn stairs. That's why his bones is broke. Yeah, so that was I can't. I think the if I had to nitpick something, it's the fact that Walter got beat up like his first day of school. Like I'm like really the boy just got here and the school bully was just already beating him up on the playground. I'm like really like they don't even know the kid. I'm sure he ain't say more than 3 words to anybody in here. That's my nitpick, but I can't.
Yeah.
And Rusty's outfit choices. Because that tie with that green striped shirt with that red polka dot tie had no business being paired together.
He's an eccentric teacher.
No, but story wise, it was strong. The horror was there. I was scared. It was like being in a horror movie through Walter's eyes. There are other pieces of it that I would mention, but I'll wait to see where it falls on your list before I share some other points because I think you may bring them up. But yeah, it's not a weak story. It just I had to put it at 4 because I know why the other movies are 3, 2, and 1. Why the other tales are 3, 2, and 1.
Yeah. Cool. Well, my number 4 is Road Cop Revelation, and this is a really good tale because I feel like it's laced with a lot of subtle things and subtle elements in policing that enable the kind of brutality that they display. And so basically, the center of this story is this cop beating of this black politician, Martin Morehouse. And it's 3 white cops that participate in this beating. And then there's a rookie cop named Clarence in the car. And he, I believe, does he run the plate while he's in the car?
They send Clarence to run the plate while the 3 white cops are like interrogating. Yeah.
And Clarence finds out, oh, this is Martin Morehouse, a politician. And, of course, the cops, they don't give a shit.
Yeah. He's like, Clarence is like, don't y'all know who this is? This is Martin Morehouse. And the cops are like, we know exactly who this is.
This is precisely what we're doing.
That's why we're about to mess this dude up.
Yeah. So, they basically try to hide the fact that they beat him, and they shoot him up with drugs, and then they drive his car into a harbor, and just to make it look like he OD'd and
ran off the road.
Yeah. And basically from that point on, Clarence is kind of haunted at the fact that he remained silent and didn't blow the whistle on his fellow officers, and he has these visions of Morehouse, and Morehouse is telling him, bring them to me, because he wants vengeance. And one night he visits Morehouse's grave and has his partners come out, and Morehouse comes back this night, and he looks very scary. I think I feel like the makeup's pretty well done, and he looks genuinely frightening. And it's like basic revenge after that, and then we see Clarence at the close of the story. It appears that he's institutionalized, but yet we cut to the mortuary, and
he's in a casket.
Somehow he died. We don't really get any definitive answer as to what caused his death or anything. But this story was really well done because I felt like it, like I said earlier, I felt like it really explored like a lot of those dynamics within policing that allows this kind of brutality to persist. And I mean, the cops, they felt so emboldened to do what they did to him. And I think at first glance, someone may look at this story and feel like it's a little hyperbolic because this is an extreme example of brutality and an extreme example of crooked cop behavior. I think most cop behavior that you see that's on the crooked end of policing isn't always going to be as blatant as this, but this does happen.
Right.
There have been stories that have been worse.
There have been cops who, I mean, will take it all the way down to like the framing of how you died to take it off of them.
Yeah.
Like, let alone just killing you for no damn reason, but then framing it to look like you did it to yourself.
Yeah. So I think depicting the cops' actions in this way does have merit because there have been stories that have damn near been worse than what they've done in this movie. And it's what's so interesting about it, and being that this is the tale that opens the well, it's the first tale that Mr. Sims tells. It kind of sets the tone for the rest of the movie in that you're seeing the horror is in the very real life threats that black people face, not so much the supernatural stuff you see in the last half. And I think it effectively framed Rusty's approach to all of the tales, in that what you're going to see in this movie is horrific events that black people face all the time. That is our horror.
Right.
And the images that you have come to associate with standard horror films, he's using that to bring justice in the last half of the tale. And I thought that was so interesting. Morehouse, like, being the undead now. Like, that's generally in any other horror movie, that's the horror. That is the horrific thing. But he's there to dispense justice on these cops that did him wrong. And I just thought that was an interesting inverse of, like, the way he used standard horror imagery to do that in his tale. So I outlined all that good stuff to say, I think I put it at number 4 because if I were to nitpick anything, honestly, I would have made the cop behavior maybe a little more subtle, just to make it fit a more generalized depiction of
make it feel even more real.
Yeah, of what corrupt cops look like. Because I think most corrupt cops are sneaky.
Yeah.
They try to be a little more
They try to be
about
personable. They try to be,
Yeah.
Okay, so Rogue Cop Revelation is my number 3.
Okay.
It's what I had on the fence with Boys Do Get Bruised. That was my toss-up of who gets 3, who gets 4.
Yeah.
I gave this 3. This is where I brought in a little bit extra criteria of, like, my response to the tale. This tale was the second most horrific tale for me in this movie. The way it just, my physical and mental response to it, the horror of it, was haunting. Like, this was one of the tales that, like, as a kid when I watched it, like, scared the shit out of me. Like, Boys Do Get Bruised, like, there's horror there. KKK come up, and it wasn't something that you lose sleep over. But this tale and another we haven't mentioned yet, they were the 2 horror tales for me. So that gave it an edge over Boys Do Get Bruised, and that's why I put it in 3. Because, like you said, the horror wasn't even the undead Martin Morehouse.
Yeah.
Even though that's where all the effects were, and you're clearly supposed to see him as, like, this zombie undead being who's being driven by whatever this liquid is in his chest. Like, that was supposed to be the horror. That's not the shit that scared me. It was the murder of him in the beginning. That the beating of him with strange fruit playing over it, because strange fruit in itself is a haunting ass song. And when you play it over something that to black people is a very real experience, that shit is terrifying. And then injecting him with the drugs and driving him in, oh my gosh, like that shit made my stomach turn for a long time. Like I'm finally able to watch it and not feel like I could probably throw up.
Yeah.
But it was the tale that gave me that response, and so that horror of it is why I put it in 3 and put Boys Do Get Bruised out at 4. But again, I couldn't give it the 1 or 2 slot. But yeah, no, it was there on par. With a lot of what you said, the horror was just in the social piece of it.
Yeah.
And not the makeup effects.
Yeah.
Which is just so crazy to say, because like a cop's head gets ripped off, and I'm like, oh, okay.
No,
I'm still more sick at the thought of y'all injecting this dude with drugs and driving him in the damn pond.
Yeah.
Like,
all that stuff is frightening. And
yes.
I mean, that definitely adds to the horror feel of it. But Martin Morehouse in that moment, he's not going after innocent people trying to harm them, which is what traditionally would be going on in horror films.
And that's not the part of the story that you apply to your own life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the supernatural part. So you're like, you're not going to be as, I mean, it looks scary. The makeup and stuff is scary. But that's not the part where you're like, man, that shit could happen to me.
Yeah.
But like the way they beat him and then framed him and then killed him, that shit we see happening to our people. And so looking at it, you're like, holy fuck, like they would do some shit like that. That is the horror, not like, oh man, this zombie guy just ripped the head off. Like that's not shit that you're going to see on the news or in your community. But what they did to him just for being a progressive black politician who wanted to rid the streets of corrupt cops, like that is how like cops would respond in that level of anger if you're corrupt enough. And there are cops that would respond in a very similar fashion. I don't know that they go as far as like showing up and pissing on his grave or something. I don't know. But I mean like the actual beatings and stuff.
Yeah.
Like that part felt more rooted in like real world experiences that we know and see.
Absolutely. So
that was the horror. And the fact that this was done in 95. Yeah. You got to remember, Tales from the Hood, this first movie, this was out in 95. So this is before the George Floyds and the Eric Garner. Like, it's before even more horrors that we're seeing in our everyday news. It's before the Breonna Taylors. It's before all of that. They had it here.
Yep.
So I feel like it's probably more horrific now.
It's always been happening. I think now with the advent of the cameras, everything's just more accessible now. You see it more.
Yeah.
And it really makes you question, fuck, what didn't we see back then?
Exactly. What got missed?
Yeah. How
many, dead bodies were found and we didn't know that it was because of some corrupt shit?
Yeah. So, we're on story number 3. So, my number 3 was Boys Do Get Bruised.
I knew it.
This story, I remember when I was a kid, this is one of my earliest memories of this movie, is this story, actually. Because I remember this movie being on at someone's house, and this was the first story I had ever seen. And the visual of the monster claws peering through the crack of the door, like that stuck with me.
Yeah. And
just seeing Walter crying, like that's kind of like my earliest image that I remember from this movie at all. And it's still kind of a disturbing image. And with this tale, I think anytime you see a child in any danger, you're just going to be invested in a different way. Your investment is way more intense when you see a child being harmed. But yeah, you went through framing, what the story was about and everything, so I'm not going to go back and rehash all that. But
tell us why it was number 3.
It was Number three, and I mean it's like dead in the middle. So I mean, again, like all of these stories, I mean it's just hard to find a line of separation between a lot of them that is all that significant because they all have merit. I see why they're here, and for the most part, they're executed well. I like this story a lot, and again, I have to talk about David Allen Greer in this role because my earliest memory or frame of reference for David Allen Greer anything was of course in Living Color. But
Mm-hmm.
when I thought David Allen Greer back then, immediately my mind would go to the Men on Film sketch in
Yes.
Living Color.
Yep.
So to see that and then see him in this role was kind of a mind fuck because you're kind of primed to laugh when you see him. And I think Rusty even said, maybe it was in a screening, that at first people were laughing at him. But then when they saw the beatings keep dragging
Yeah.
out,
They're like, yo.
they were just stone silent because it was just so disturbing. And when you see him beat on Walter's mom, and then he goes down in the kitchen, he's like grabbing Walter up and actually mushes him in the face. It's horrifying seeing that. And when they finally get Monster's picture and start folding it, there's some cool body horror with the practical effects they use to make it look like his arms all bent up, and then when they finally twist him, that image is disgusting.
Yeah, and like you said, they did all of that with practical effects.
Yeah.
Like they didn't CGI it.
It looked so disgusting. I think nowadays they would have done that with CG, and it just
They did something similar like that with CG in Tales from the Hood 2 in the medium when the dude's head spun around.
Yeah,
They
they
CG'd that, but here they had his whole body twist up and they did practical on that.
It makes a huge difference when it's a practical effect because I think your mind can tell when something is physically on a set.
Yeah, it's the realism of it when you do it practically. Like it's right there in the scene happening and not superimposed.
Yeah, I think what it is that it just feels tangible.
Yeah.
And seeing, that body contort in that way.
Yes.
It was disgusting.
It really was. And then when she stepped on it,
and the blood
splatter, I was like, ugh. Yeah.
Yeah, so I thought that I like that each story just has a unique approach to horror. Like it has a different stamp of horror on it. Like the KKK comeuppance with the dolls, and then all the makeup on Morehouse
and the liquid bulb. That bulb is still like an enigma to me. I'm like, what is that supposed to be representing? Like it's supposed to be his fuel or whatever. But I thought it was just such an interesting element to include in him as the undead. Because I'm like, if you're undead, like where's the bulb liquid coming from?
It makes no sense.
It's intriguing.
It makes no sense,
but it is intriguing.
Yeah, and when he kills that last cop with the syringe, and then he gets absorbed into the wall and he turns it. That's like really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, this tale was just kind of hitting in every way. Boys do get bruised, and it's hard to really find a spot or anything to really knock it for, honestly. It's beyond a serviceable story. That kid, I believe his name is Brandon Hammond. He was like in everything in the '90s, and
he was.
You could see why. I mean, he was a good child actor, and I mean, I guess why it would be under my top two.
Because the top two did something better. I guess.
I think.
Well, you also probably want to. I don't know if you're going to tie it in later because I think I know what your next one's going to be.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, applying your logic to the list too is probably another reason why you had it at number 3.
yeah, I'll expound on that
Well,
further.
well, I mean, we're probably about to expound on it. We're at my number two.
Uh-huh.
My number two is Hardcore Convert.
Okay.
Um,
That's not my number two.
this was, this was. I have my justification. So, with that said, I guess it just kind of gives it away for the whole thing.
It does.
But this is my number two. I put Hardcore Convert at number two and not number one because all of like the wraparound was just pristine. And so I just I wanted to keep all of the tales ranked together and the wraparound be my number one because they all connected. Yeah. It was such a strong wraparound. So that's why I put it at number two and not at number one because it very easily could have been my number one, but I didn't want to disjoint all of the other tales being ranked together.
Okay. Well, since you said that, I'll go ahead and give mine away. I had put Welcome to My Mortuary at number two, and I put Hardcore Convert at number one. But honestly, I kind of view them as kind of tied together.
Right.
Because this is the only instance in the series where the wraparound is actually
the vehicle.
It's the vehicle, and it's also directly connected to the last tale because the three characters that we follow throughout the mortuary are directly linked to the central character in the last tale. And
the other piece for me is you wouldn't have the tales without the wraparound in this movie. In the other two, like, yeah. I mean, you could still kind of have the tales in three without the wraparound. You'd have, like, I felt like that wraparound could have been a lot of different things.
It was totally disconnected.
It could have been a lot of different ways that you got to the tales. In the other one, in this one, like, you needed this to be the tale.
Yeah. It feels weird to me even including the wraparounds as separate, but because they list them as separate stories,
yeah, they gave it its own story.
You feel kind of inclined to just, do it that way.
Yeah.
But to me, I mean, Hardcore Convert is kind of tied in to Welcome to My Mortuary in a way.
Yes.
And but yeah, I'll let you.
Yeah, no. So I had it at number two, but it is number one for me out of the actual tales.
Yeah.
And for me, again, the horror of this tale was the imagery of whatever that torture machine was, whatever they put him on and strapped him into, and had him watching the clips.
Yeah.
Those clips was my horror.
It's the worst thing, man.
Those clips, I put those. That's why this was up here and Rogue Cop was right under it, because the imagery of what they had him watching to try to like recalibrate him, rehab him, or whatever, help him see the error of his ways. Terrifying imagery in that shit.
Because one, it's real.
Right. Those weren't made for this movie. Yeah. Those were actual photos.
Not like
and
the footage, but the photos of the lynchings and shit, that's all real.
Right. Those were photos from actual lynchings of actual reactions to our bodies being hung up on these trees and the white people standing there smiling and praising it. Like, that shit was terrifying to me.
I think it's in that where it reinforces that the real horror isn't just the black experience.
The real world shit was the most horrifying shit in this movie, and that just speaks volumes to the black experience, everyday horrors.
Yeah.
Because there was some makeup effects and stuff later in this tale that were, there, and they were kind of creepy, but that wasn't the horror for me. Like, that part didn't get me. It was him on that machine looking at the stuff, and I was just like, what? Like, it's jarring to see it. And then on top of that, I put this as like the top tale out of the four, just because it was just a great culmination of all of the other tales. And I feel like it all came to light when Crazy K was like, what about my nightmares? What about the nightmares that I've lived in my whole life? It's like, that was all of the other tales.
Exactly.
And so it kind of made everything else more concrete as just one whole story by giving you a Crazy K.
Yeah, when you look at the previous tales, Crazy K is the worst outcome of all those issues explored before. If if you are if you do not address those, this is the outcome in that environment. This is the epitome of what you do not want in this environment.
Right.
And if all of those previous issues in the other tales go unaddressed and they continue in that way, this is what happens. Crazy K,
Crazy K.
the first the first time you see Crazy K, he's driving in his car, and then you see him spot one of his ops, and he gets almost orgasmic at the thought of killing
going
him.
to kill this guy. Right.
I mean,
like he stops in his tracks from wherever the hell he was going, and what he was about to do did not matter.
Lamont Bentley plays that moment so well because I mean, you could just see this childlike glee
ready.
and just yeah.
He could have been on his way to something real good, and it wasn't going to be better than what he was about to do.
Yeah,
and
he saw. Right away you get a sense that like he lives for this. Life is cheap for him.
Right.
Other people's lives mean nothing. And when he gets put beside that white supremacist, when they lock him up in that cage, you know, he's reflecting to him, who are all the people you killed in your environment? They were blacks. Your agenda is really no different than mine.
Exactly.
Like, the way you're carrying out what you do,
you're doing some of my work.
Exactly. And there's a brief moment of kind of sober realization for Crazy K, but you know, there's another phase of his rehabilitation that he goes through, and then he gets in the spinneroomeometer thing.
Yeah, and it has a name, y'all.
Yeah,
we watched the behind the scenes, but the gyro something sphere or something
crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, he gets it there, and you know they have these images of these lynchings of black people that are juxtaposed with gang violence, and they're the same. It's the same outcome.
It is.
Black life is cheap to both parties, and you're contributing to the same genocide in a way. And then when he goes in this sensory deprivation chamber, he's confronted with all of his victims, and he makes the comment like when gosh, I forget the lady's name who was in All the White that was down there with him, but she's basically confronting him.
I forgot too.
On his bullshit, like just trying to plead with him to break the cycle, because the Crazy K and people with his mentality, they're in this perpetual cycle of there's always get back around the corner. This cycle of somebody did this, gotta get the get back. And somebody in the middle of that needs to stop and say, none of this is worth it. But you can't do it. You're committed to that way of being, and it's just you're mentally just trapped. Even Crazy K, it was interesting to me the dialogue they gave him, because he's more self-aware than we really realize, because he says, what about all the fucked up shit that happened to me? Like, all of this created me.
Right.
All of those three other...
Nobody cared about my life and created this.
Those three other tales are why I'm here.
Right.
And nobody gave a fuck. And you almost...
But you want me to give a fuck.
Yeah. And you almost see Walter in there. In that rant.
Right.
Like
what about... This is Walter like 10 years later.
Yeah. Like, what about my personal nightmare? What about my trauma? I don't give a fuck about any of these people, because of everything that happened to me.
And nobody gave a fuck about what happened to me.
Right.
So why would I give a fuck about anybody else's livelihood, existence? Nobody was there for me to do that when it mattered. Right. And now it's too far gone, so I don't give a fuck about nothing.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, he, that story kind of culminates where he's just like, I don't give a fuck. Period. I
And
don't give a fuck.
and the piece I like about it is once he solidified that that was how he felt, we then jump back to him
In that
laid in the
moment.
street, and that was all his opportunity to change his way of thinking, and it would have saved his soul.
Mm-hmm.
But because he stayed solidified in that stance of I don't give a fuck, the three people from the wraparound take him out, concreted his fate, and he's gone.
Yeah.
And then we return back to the wraparound. And I just thought that was such a powerful ending because it's almost like if he had seen the light and been like, you know what, you're right, I do need to fix this. That was almost like he was his purgatory.
Mm-hmm.
And his outcome could have been different.
Yep.
But it translated back to him laying on the street, and that I don't give a fuck is what came out of his mouth, laying there on the ground. That's him making that decision. And then the three people over him was like, we don't give a fuck either. Pow.
Yeah, all of the supporting roles in that particular story, they were all angels trying to throw him a lifeline.
Exactly.
And he just
did not take it, didn't see it, like nothing. Like even the KKK guy, I felt like was kind of there to be like, I'm trying to help you out here, buddy, because you right now is working the same mission I'm working, and I know you hate people like me.
Yeah.
And none of that got through to him.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was gone.
Yeah, it seems like it is at certain moments. That's what's so interesting about it. At a certain point, he's just like, no, I don't care. Yeah. Like, this was my situation. I do not give a fuck. My life is my life, and this is the way I have to be to function at an optimal level in this zoo that I was born in.
Right.
And it's just fucked up. And I think it's kind of interesting because I don't know what your read on it is, but it's almost like Rusty leaves us with a message of almost no hope. Because like the hood mentality for someone so immersed in it is just, it's so hard to reform that. It's like you don't even see the lights start to turn on for some of these people until they're like 40.
Right.
Like until they're OGs.
Right.
And then
they're out of the game. And I'm like, well, now you done lost feeling in your arm. You've been shot so damn much. Like, it's like, shit, what you gonna do now? You know?
And it's like, how do you penetrate that before then? And it's just, it seems hopeless.
Yeah, it's like this endless cycle of no progress.
Yeah, because
it's like in any progress you do make is going to get canceled out by someone else in the cycle.
Yeah, so that's why I felt like, okay, restructuring it, even though I don't think it's necessary, but it's like you just look at, okay, the Metker story is it's instrumental in forming the social construct that Crazy K is going to function within. Policy it generates everything.
Yeah.
That is how it determines how our society is set up. And Metker's racist ass policies very well could have been instrumental in, framing the reality that we have to function in. And you have corrupt police working within that system that politicians frame for us. And then you have broken homes in the environments that exist within this system. And broken homes where children are abused. And then births Crazy K. An individual who has no regard for human life at all.
Right.
And almost gets a psychopathic amusement out of taking it away. And that's the epitome of what the world does not want, but it's what we produce and reproduce without fail because of all of those issues that were explored in those other tales that continue to be neglected. So I just love the synergy amongst all of that in this first Tales from the Hood movie, and I think the wraparound just brings it all beautifully to a close.
Yeah, and that's why I had it at number one.
Yeah.
Because the wraparound itself had to be strong for these tales to be as strong as they were, and it did a really good job of connecting all of the stories and bringing in those three supporting characters that when you start the movie you don't realize how they're going to be integrated into the tales. You don't realize you're going to end up like circling back to them in the way that we did. In this story, and the reveal that Mr. Sims isn't just a mortician.
Yeah. No, it was good.
It was so good. And then there were just like into the subtleties of you don't realize that you're starting out kind of at like this entry top level of the mortuary, and I don't even think I realized until after a few watches that they're like descending further into this funeral home that is then revealed as no, they are walking their way down to hell as they're going through these tales. And we get to the last tale. There go our supporting characters. They are what solidified that purgatory decision of Crazy K, and in doing that, solidified their own outcomes, and you are now here in hell.
Yeah.
Fucking genius. Genius.
It was very well done.
It was so well. Clarence Williams was a great devil, Mr. Sims. I mean, he was like weirdly creepy. Like he had these mannerisms about him where, of course, you get some chuckles because his delivery is like, man, this dude is fucking weird. But it was like creepy weird. And you're like, something is off about him and we're going to figure it out. And then when you get to the end, you're like, aha. He knew what secret he was walking them through that they weren't aware of. And just fucking genius.
It was, man. And I think just seeing where this ended, it almost leaves you with the question. I mean, I know we have the sequels now, but how do you follow that up? Because to me, after doing the Crazy K story, there is nowhere else to go.
Especially because that shit's still relevant.
It's relevant, and I think that is, in terms of just the hood, Crazy K is the epitome of what no one wants to face.
Right.
Ever. So,
and that's probably never going to get fixed.
And so anything you follow up with is just going to pale in comparison.
You're going backwards.
You've touched the major issue already.
Right.
So, yeah, I think if anything, the sequels were destined to be trivial by comparison just because of how strong the first one was. I mean, I don't think you're ever going to touch the poignancy of what they did in that first movie. It just blows my mind that you have these sequels sitting next to it that comes nowhere near it.
Oh my god!
I cannot think of a further gap between an original movie and its sequel
than here.
I can't think of anything comparable to that.
If you took the titles off of these shits, I would not watch any of the subsequent movies and be like, oh, these are like that Tales from the Hood movie from back in the day. I wouldn't even think they were about this, like in the same universe, same people.
It's crazy.
That's like if I knew about Tales from the Hood but didn't know that the other ones were 2 and 3, you gave me no title, I wouldn't watch those and be like, man, these remind me of that Tales from the Hood movie from back in the day. Like, terrible connection. No connection, really, other than Keith David also being Mr. Sims in Tales from the Hood too. That's the only thing, and the poopity pop. That's your like clue that hey, this is a sequel.
Yeah.
Like no.
Yeah.
Just visually no connection. Thematically connection is all like just no.
Yeah, when I think of the sequels, especially 2, I just think trivial. Like it's goosebumps for black millennials. That's what I feel like.
What for
Tales
two?
from the Hood 2.
Really?
Goosebumps
I
and
feel
Black
like you
Mirror.
got to give Goosebumps more credit.
No.
Goosebumps had some scary
No,
episodes.
you know what? You're right. Goosebumps is
Yeah,
is
Goosebumps
scary.
is giving as a compliment to Tales from the Hood too.
Oh shit!
Like
That's
Tales
bad.
from the Hood 2, I couldn't give it an Are You Afraid of the Dark? I couldn't give it a Goosebump. I mean, those things had more scare to them, and depending on the episodes.
Yeah.
So this is just its own bad horror anthology for two especially. 3 tried a little bit of redemption, but
Yeah, it was trying to steer it in the right direction.
2
I mean,
was
at
just
least
it was just too damn bright to start out.
At least with 3, with the exception of Bunker. I mean, all of it is attempted to be scary.
Right.
It's not overly. It's not chasing overly comedic moments like I felt 2 was.
2 was trying to be a horror comedy anthology.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I think Tales from the Hood delivered on everything I think it sought to deliver on, and I think this movie is severely underrated.
Oh, it's forgotten.
I feel like it's just not part of the conversation enough.
I agree.
In terms of just movie appreciation, this movie is. It's probably. I think we talked yesterday. I said I think this is probably my favorite
horror movie. Yes,
it is just period.
When
it's
I'm like, hey, want to put on a scary movie? Tales from the Hood is the thing I think of.
Yeah.
Before I think of putting on anything else that we've talked about this month.
It's just gonna hit me every time, and I think I put Hardcore Convert at the top just because it just left me feeling gut punched.
Yeah,
it just leaves me with a gut punch. Like Welcome to My Mortuary, it does a great job of wrapping up the movie, but I think Hardcore Convert to me was just more potent by the end of it.
Right.
And I think that's why I kind of had them swapped. I mean, Welcome to My Mortuary kind of ends everything in a nice little bow and has a cool little twist, and it brings everything to a satisfying close. But Hardcore Convert, every time I watch that specific story, it just it triggers a lot of reflection and pondering on where we are and how far we just have not gone in these past 20 or so years.
So I want to do a recap real quick of our list.
Sure.
So I've got at 5 KKK Comeuppance, 4 Boys Do Get Bruised, 3 Rogue Cop Revelation, 2 Hardcore Convert, and 1 Welcome to My Mortuary.
All right, so for me, I have at 5 KKK Comeuppance, number 4 Rogue Cop Revelation, 3 Boys Do Get Bruised, 2 Welcome to My Mortuary, and 1 Hardcore Convert.
So we had 2 swaps in there again.
Yep.
Although I could swap my 1 and 2 to match yours, but logically I just figured I'd keep the tails together, and that's why. But Hardcore Convert is my number 1. Out of all of the actual tales.
Yeah.
So that's why it was the highest out of those. But then the wraparound just made sense to keep it at 1, just not to break that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that was a good discussion.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think you get the sense in just how I discuss these stories that honestly, the ranking in this episode was really just where the rubber hit the road to get a discussion going about this.
Yeah.
I mean, I really just wanted to talk about the movie.
Right.
I mean, it's like
because
the ranking.
All of the tales are 1. They're all good. They're all strong.
All
the
good.
movie is strong. We're gonna have an episode where we talk about all of the movies, like the tales and Poland American Nightmares.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about it then. But
yeah, I was gonna say the sequels are where the rankings may be a little more
dicey.
meaningful because there are legit things that we hate about
Yes,
those
I
stories.
cannot tell you anything I hate about this first one. I only have one lingering question about this first one, and I would really love for Rusty or Darren to just take me out of my misery and tell me how the hell Clarence died.
Yeah,
I just need to know how he ended up in the mortuary.
Yeah, one, how did he die, and was his inaction with the Morehouse situation worthy of him being sent to hell?
Right, because
Because
that's the other
essentially
piece.
everybody's in
Essentially,
hell.
everyone in this mortuary are people who were sent to hell. This is not like to be looked at as just a regular mortuary, but this is the devil's mortuary.
Yeah.
So yeah, everyone whose tale we hear and they're in the casket, their demise was they were sent to hell. That's why they're here. They'd be at another funeral home if they was going to heaven or somewhere else. So yeah, like how did he die? And why'd he get sent to hell?
Yeah. Because
he tried to help with the revenge.
Yeah, it's not like he just left it. He was mentally
his inaction. Yeah, his inaction was punishment enough for himself. Mm-hmm. Because you see that he left the police force and was down bad, and he was already just beating himself up for not doing anything there. And so I felt like he was remorseful for being, for not doing what he could have done in that situation. And so to make up for it, he followed Martin Morehouse's request to bring them to me. Mm-hmm. He followed through on that, and he did his part. He brought them to him, and he said at the end, he said, hey, look, I brought him to you, like almost like, please, like relieve me, forgive me for not doing anything when I could have, but this is my way of trying to make up for it. And instead, he gets sent to be institutionalized. We don't know how he ultimately dies, and he still goes to hell.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean,
that's my only like open-ended thing with Tales, but that's not sitting there. It's there, but I'm just interested of like that's my only like, hey, I did not get closure on this because I'm like, well, you give us our last visual of him is him in a padded room. That's not showing me like how he died, whereas all the other tales pretty much they let us know this is why they're here in the mortuary. This is how they got here, and you see why they ended up in hell.
Yeah,
it's like we don't even see Clarence's death first of all, let alone like, hey, I think he kind of repaid his debt. I don't know why he needed to be going to hell.
Yeah, it's harsh when you find out. Yeah, this place is hell. That means
Clarence went to hell, and I'm like, damn, Clarence, like. What'd he do? You know? Like he tried.
Right.
It was 3 against 1 in that situation, and he was new. He couldn't really figure out what to do in the spur of the moments, but he made up for it on the after death side.
It's like Ricky Cop, But it's like some people say, hey, there's a special spot in hell reserved for people who stand by and do nothing in the face of injustice. So
yeah. So I guess that's what we were going with. But dang, man, can you at least tell me how he ended up dying to go to hell?
Yeah.
He went crazy to death? Like, that's what you're telling me. With how he ended up.
That was very weird. The pan out from the window, and you see him very much alive, and then they cut his body in the casket.
And I'm like, so he went crazy to death.
Yep.
The asylum killed him. I that's all I got. But overall, strong movie. All the tales deserve number 1. Great performances throughout. Everyone was well cast. Some very just all-star performances here. And
there's not a weak link performance-wise.
And this is one of the movies where we don't know if Rusty or Darren did which tales, which makes me kind of sad because I would love to know like if Darren had his hand in any versus Rusty or if it was just all collaborative. But
yeah, I'm not sure.
Couldn't find anything on it in my search, but great movie, favorite horror movie, job well done. Maybe we'll get some more horror anthologies from them in the future. Who knows?
No.
But we like American Nightmares.
But the last one they've done officially was 3, and I don't want to see more of that. Even though that was a step in the right direction,
you don't want more of that.
I mean,
I want another American Nightmares. Maybe don't give it a tale. No, I don't want another Tales from the Hood. I will say that. Don't stop slapping this title on your anthologies because you're
Yeah.
never gonna live up
Unless
to the
it's
first
gonna
one.
be worthy.
Make
But,
new anthologies or add on to the American Nightmare like that. They subtitle that Tales from the Crib. Maybe you add on to that one, but don't put this title Tales from the Hood on any other anthologies because this is not going to be the first one.
yeah.
It's not going to live up to it. It's not going to connect. It's not going to do it justice. Just don't stop using that title. But I wouldn't mind seeing another horror anthology from Rusty and Darren.
Yeah. You know, based on a recent interview when he was doing promo for Tales from the Hood 3, Rusty did acknowledge that 2 was, lacking in certain spots. Although he remains proud of the Emmett Till story.
He stands by that damn sacrifice.
He loves that story.
Y'all will hear about it in the next episode.
Yeah.
But yeah.
He loves that story. He stands by that to this day. But yeah, I mean, I think he acknowledges that some of it was a little goofy and tried to course correct with 3, but even the course correction was lacking outside of one story, in my opinion. But yeah, it's like if maybe you just need to keep at it till you land on something. I don't know, man. But yeah, maybe you're right. Like, just don't strive for Tales from the Hood anything.
Yeah, like you don't have to keep it at that. Even if you want to keep doing hood horror anthologies, just don't put this title on it, please. Yeah. Because you dig it a deeper hole.
Yeah, you're really gonna start cheapening the name.
First one. You're gonna start taking the honor and the respect off of the first one. The worse these continuations are. Yeah. And that first one is just such a strong, necessary piece of just Black horror and or Black media history. Like, don't put any more like dings on the name.
Yeah, it's like when I show that movie to future generations, it's like I don't want them to go
watch more sequels that just get worse and worse and worse, because then it's just like, well, shit.
That's the thing. It's bad. Like so people say, well, you still have the original thing. How could sequels and stuff ruin what's already there? And that's
case in point.
On some level, I get it, but over time, you're gonna have kids and teenagers who have no frame of reference for what that thing was in real time, right? And they're gonna see this collection of movies and just think it's.
And the thing for me is, they may see this collection of movies out of order. Yeah. So you may have kids who see 2 or 3 first, right, and then they don't get to the first one because 2 or 3 were so bad that they're like, I don't even want to see any other parts of this. Yeah. And then they don't get to the actual good one.
That's what I'm saying. What you do with a property does matter, because over time, it's like it's all part of the same pot, and it gets validated. Right. And I don't know if that's a good thing. Yeah. Yeah,
it's like kind of how I feel about Blade Trinity. Like, if someone sees that shit first, they're not going to want to go watch the first one, because they're like, what the hell is it? This is a terrible franchise. And it's like, no. Like, that's not the one. Go back, like don't do that.
Good point.
Yeah. I would never recommend you catch some of these shits out of order, because you're not going to, it's not going to motivate you to see where it began.
Yeah. Very true. Yeah, because a lot of people, case in point, Scream. Like,
I was thinking about that too.
There are a lot of people's first Scream movies were probably 5 and 6.
Right.
And then they may go back and look at some of the other ones. So it's like, for a lot of people, they have no nostalgia attached to, what we saw in real time. And what's more validated is like recency. What was more recent? And 2 and 3 were very recent. Tales from the Hood, 2 and 3. I mean, and goddamn, that's a horrible first sample to have.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, but that was our ranking, if you can call it that, for the Tales from the Hood stories. And Hope you enjoyed it. Maybe some of you agree.
Hopefully it motivated you. If you haven't seen it, I really hope you have, because we done told you everything. But if you have, hopefully this might motivate you to rewatch it and look at it even deeper. If you hadn't before.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was that. We got one more movie to do for y'all before we then rank them all. So
American Nightmares coming up. This has been Alrod
and Rain.
And be kind, be well, and we will see you.
Peace out.